You're with ABC News, where it's 9 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time and 6 a.m. in the West. Leading our bulletin this hour, the US President Donald Trump is demanding to be directly involved in selecting a new leader in Iran. That as Azerbaijan is drawn into the conflict, accusing Iran of carrying out 2 drone strikes on a village and airport. In a moment, we're live to Washington, where our correspondent has the latest developments. Also ahead, more flights from the Middle East have landed in Australia. We'll cross to our reporter at Melbourne Airport shortly, where there were emotional reunions after dozens of people arrived from Dubai this morning. The federal government has officially banned Islamist group Hizb ut-Tahrir under its new hate speech laws. It is the first organisation to be captured under the legislation. The US Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, is fired in the face of mounting criticism over her handling of the immigration crackdown in Minnesota. And the Matildas are into the knockout stages of the Asian Cup after defeating Iran 4-0 on the Gold Coast. The defeat setting up a showdown with South Korea on Sunday. It is Friday, the 6th of March. I'm Kathryn Robinson from the land of the Darug people in Parramatta in Western Sydney. This is ABC News Mornings. The US President Donald Trump says he wants to be personally involved in choosing Iran's next leader. In an interview with Axios, Mr. Trump said reported frontrunner Mujtaba Khamenei, who is the son of the slain Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, would be unacceptable. Mr. Trump spoke publicly moments ago.
The United States military, together with the wonderful Israeli partners, continues to totally demolish the enemy far ahead of schedule and at levels that people have never seen before, actually. We're destroying more of Iran's missiles and drone capability every single hour, knocking them out like nobody thought was possible. But they're tough and they want to fight. And they're calling, they're saying, how do we make a deal? I said, you're being a little bit late. And we want to fight now more than they do.
President Trump speaking just moments ago this morning. Now, this comes as the war in the Middle East has now spread to more than a dozen countries. Azerbaijan is accusing Iran of drone attacks that injured 4 people at an airport. Tehran has denied the attack on its northern neighbour, but Azerbaijan has vowed to retaliate.
To strike Nakhchivan in an ugly, cowardly and shameless manner, this stain will never be erased from their ugly and unsightly face. Therefore, all necessary measures will be taken through our diplomatic channels.
Thousands of people had fled southern Beirut after Israel's military issued mass evacuation orders in the Lebanese capital. Israeli troops have entered Lebanese territory in their new offensive against Hezbollah, which has killed more than 100 people. France is ramping up military support to the Lebanese armed forces and urging both Israel and Iran to keep Lebanon out of their war. That as Israel's finance minister threatened to turn parts of Beirut into Gaza.
You wanted to bring hell upon us. You brought hell upon yourselves. The Dahiyeh will look like Khan Yunis. Our northern residents will live in quiet, peace, and security.
Meanwhile, the US and Israel have kept up their attacks on Iran. The Iranian regime says more than 1,200 people have now been killed. It's also warned the US will, quote, bitterly regret torpedoing an Iranian warship in the Pacific. Iran has continued its retaliatory attacks on US-aligned Gulf countries, hitting an oil refinery in Bahrain. The US State Department has closed its embassy in Kuwait, where 6 American soldiers were killed on the weekend. And the UK says it's sending 4 fighter jets to Qatar in another sign the war's escalation is not slowing down. Well, the military action in Iran has drawn attention from domestic issues in the US in recent days, but they're front and centre again today with Donald Trump's announcement he's replacing his embattled Homeland Security Secretary. Kristi Noem has been under pressure over her handling of immigration enforcement issues. She'll be replaced by Oklahoma Senator and former professional mixed martial arts fighter Markwayne Mullin. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent Barbara Miller from Washington. Good morning to you, Barbara. What is behind this move?
As you say, Kristi Noem was really increasingly embattled. She came to exemplify, I guess, to illustrate the more harsh extremes of Donald Trump's immigration enforcement policies, in particular following the deaths of those two people in Minnesota, Renee Good and Alex Pretty. She was very quick out the blocks to say that both of those were incidents of domestic terrorism. And in both those cases, the video evidence just simply didn't back that up. She was also increasingly unpopular with her boss, President Donald Trump, over concerns, a whole raft of concerns, including an alleged affair, but also concerns that she was putting herself in the limelight a little too much, including in a very expensive ad campaign about immigration enforcement. And then this week, things really came to a head. She had a hearing in the Senate. She essentially refused to apologize for calling those two people domestic terrorists. That certainly didn't go down well with Democrats. And she also said that Donald Trump had approved that very controversial ad campaign worth well over $200 million US. Now, Donald Trump was angry about that. He came out doing interviews saying, no, I didn't approve that. And it seems perhaps that that's been the final straw in Kristi Noem's tenure as Homeland Security Secretary. Now, she's the first member of the cabinet to go in this administration. It had been a pretty tight ship up until now, but it seems that she had just become unviable for the president.
So, Barbara, what do we know about her replacement?
Well, as you say, Markwayne Mullin is a former MMA fighter, and the time that he got most attention, that perhaps spread across the world at least, is when he was in a hearing. He was asking questions of a union boss. This is a couple of years ago, and he offered to fight him.
After you left here, you got pretty excited about the keyboard. In fact, you tweeted at me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And let me read what the last one said. It said, greedy CEO who pretends like he's self-made. Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me. Any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
Oh, stop it.
Is that your solution every
Hold it. No, sit down. Sit down. Okay. You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond, Mr.
Hold
Chairman?
it. Hold it.
Bernie Sanders breaking up that fight before it really got going there. Now, Markwayne Mullin says in the meantime, those two men have sorted their differences out. The main thing, I guess, to know about him in terms of this role, and it'll have to be officially approved by the Senate, of course, is that he's very, very close to Donald Trump. He's also relatively popular with Democrats, seen as someone who can form alliances on both sides of the aisle. Let's just hear him reacting to the news.
I had to call my dad, and I mean, because it happened quick, right? I had to call my wife and call my dad both. And it's just, you know, pretty humbling when you start thinking about it. A little kid from West Oklahoma gets to serve in the president's cabinet. That's pretty neat.
So, Barb, that's the domestic politics going on in the United States as well. When you turn to foreign affairs there on Iran, the president has given the thumbs down to the idea that the son of Iran's supreme leader be appointed as his successor.
That's right. This is in response to reports from a couple of days ago that Mojtaba Khamenei will succeed his father. Now, those reports haven't firmed up, and in fact, the Iranian foreign minister was saying earlier that the process is still ongoing. But Donald Trump, in a couple of interviews, said that he didn't think that he would be acceptable. He called him a lightweight. And the president saying that he really wanted to be directly involved in deciding who would lead Iran. And he seems to be making this connection between what happened in Venezuela, where Delcy Rodriguez, the deputy, essentially was approved by the U.S. to lead the country after they squirreled away Nicolas Maduro, and seeming to suggest that that kind of model might also work in Iran, which would, of course, raise a lot of eyebrows, a very, very different situation. We also just heard from the president again. He was speaking ahead of a soccer event at the White House, again saying that the operation's going extremely well, that the Air Force is basically obliterated. 24 ships have been sunk, he said. And he also claimed that the Iranians were calling him, that they wanted to make a deal. But the U.S. president said, oh, at the moment, we want to fight more than them. So again, very full of bravado, these comments. He didn't take the opportunity to address what we started talking about, and that is his firing, essentially, of Kristi Noem.
Barbara Miller, thank you for the update. Well, hundreds more Australians have landed from the Middle East overnight, and more are due this morning after days of travel chaos in the wake of the Middle East war. Our reporter Stephanie Ferrier is at Melbourne Airport and joins us now. Good morning to you, Steph. A smile on your face there, some happy reunions this morning?
It's always lovely to see these reunions, particularly so when they are people who are coming from a conflict, and the relief and the happiness amongst the family and friends is absolutely palpable. There were people holding bouquets of flowers and they were rushing towards their loved ones. There were a lot of tears, there were a lot of big hugs and a lot of happiness as well. So it was really lovely to actually see so many people and the relief on people's faces as well, touching down finally on Australian soil. But we do know that there were about 293 people on board this Emirates Flight 406 this morning. That included quite a few crews, so probably only about 270 or so passengers. And that means that the flight was actually around half full. And we spoke to Helen McKenzie, one of the people who've been caught up in all of this drama. She was a tourist that was supposed to be coming back on Sunday and, of course, then got caught in Dubai. This is what she had to say about how many people were on board that flight.
Like, I come home on the plane today, it's half full. Why couldn't they have got more people on it? You know, fill those seats.
So that was Helen McKenzie, and she did say that she thought that she might get more assistance from the Department of Foreign Affairs. However, we have heard from Madeleine King, the Resources Minister, speaking on News Breakfast earlier just about how much the government is attempting to repatriate some of those Australians from the Middle East. This is what she had to say.
Officials are working as best they can and as hard as they can with the airlines to make sure that people are, getting out.
So that was Madeleine King speaking on News Breakfast earlier, and we did hear from many of the other passengers as well, just talking about how concerned they were being stuck in Dubai. Some of them were saying that they actually saw some of these missiles coming towards the hotel area and their fear about that, and seeing and hearing some of those sorts of explosions, particularly others that were talking about how great the UAE defence dome was in terms of intercepting those missiles, while others said that they actually felt quite safe while they were over there and had just returned because they had children. One of the couples that we spoke to actually had their daughter's first birthday celebration, would you believe, up in the air on board the plane. Now, that celebration was supposed to be in London until all of this conflict turned their travel plans inside out. But we do know that we're going to be seeing some more flights at least landing in Sydney today. The first flight from Doha will be arriving, also a flight from Abu Dhabi as well. However, the flights here into Melbourne remain cancelled. So there are 6 flights that remain inbound cancelled. They are from both Dubai, Qatar Airways from Doha and also from Abu Dhabi as well. We did speak to Melbourne Airport though, and they said that they were able to get 3 of the Emirates planes that had been grounded on the tarmac here out last night with a full complement of crew. There have been about 200 crew members here staying in the hotel just trying to get back on board as well while these hostilities continue to rage on. So still very much a moving situation, but obviously for the people who got here, it was a very happy homecoming.
Indeed. Steph Ferrier, thank you. Well, the federal government is refusing to answer questions over whether Australians were on board the American submarine that sank an Iranian frigate off the coast of Sri Lanka. For more, let's hear from Robbie Stevens, who is at Parliament House. Very good morning to you, Romy. There are reports that 2 Australian soldiers were on board the US sub, that their question was put to the government, but there's no confirmation yet. What do you know?
Yeah, well, not a whole lot at this stage. The Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, was pressed on this in Parliament yesterday, to which she responded that she can't comment on the specifics of Australian Defence Force personnel overseas. Now, this has all emerged after 9 News reports that 2 Australian sailors were on board the US submarine that carried out the attack on the Iranian vessel. That was off the coast of Sri Lanka, and Sri Lankan authorities have said that they have managed to rescue 32 people, but then recovered 87 bodies. Now, questions have emerged about this because Australians have been embedded on US submarines for many months now as the country prepares to acquire its own nuclear-powered submarines under the AUKUS Pact. In October, defence officials said that more than 50 ADF personnel were serving on American fast attack submarines based out of Pearl Harbor, and that roughly 100 more personnel were training across the US. Now, Greens Senator David Shoebridge asked Penny Wong, the Foreign Minister, questions about this yesterday. He asked whether or not there were Australians on that US submarine, and Penny Wong responded by saying that it's a matter for the US to discuss US submarine operations. But she also said that she couldn't provide specifics of where Australian Defence Force personnel were located overseas for operational and security reasons. Now, Government Minister Madeleine King was also asked about this earlier, and she provided a similar response. Let's take a listen.
These are national security matters. They are third-party deployment operations, and I'll have to repeat myself, I'm afraid. And I do think the Australian people understand. The government and the Defence Force won't comment on those third-party deployments.
Now, Greens Senator David Shoebridge, who was the one to ask that initial question in Parliament, says that he will continue to press the government on this, and we can expect more pressure to be applied until more details come to light.
Now, Robbie, on another issue out of Canberra just last night, Islamist group Hizb ut-Tahrir has become the first organisation to be banned under these federal government new hate speech laws. What does this mean now for anyone affiliated with this group?
Yeah, that's right. So people who remain a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir could face penalties of up to 15 years in jail after the federal government moved to list the organisation as a prohibited hate group overnight. So this move means that it will become, or it's a criminal offence to remain a member or to recruit for Hizb ut-Tahrir. And it was one of 2 groups that the federal government was targeting when it was drafting its hate speech legislation in the wake of the Bondi terror attack last year. We know that those hate speech laws ultimately passed Parliament earlier this year. The other group that the federal government was targeting in doing this was the neo-Nazi group, the National Socialist Network. Now, the Home Affairs Minister, Tony Burke, says it's groups like these that have been spreading hate for too long. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
When we put the legislation through, the Nazis disbanded the day before it came into effect. So there is not an organisation to ban there at the moment. With Hizb ut-Tahrir, we got the recommendation from ASIO, because none of this can happen. Ministers don't have now unfettered powers to ban organisations. Nothing can happen unless ASIO started.
Now, as the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke said there, the National Socialist Network did disband after Labor put this legislation forward. There were concerns at the time that members of the group could potentially go underground. Now, Tony Burke was asked about that earlier, and he said that agencies such as ASIO are doing everything that Australians would expect to, or doing all the surveillance that Australians would expect, and he said that they're keeping a close eye on them.
Robbie Stevens, thank you. Elsewhere now, counting is now underway in Nepal's pivotal general election, the first since last year's youth-led protests toppled the government. The issues that drove those protests, corruption, unemployment and economic stagnation, have been at the centre of this year's campaign. South Asia Bureau Chief Meghna Bali reports.
Counting has now officially begun across Nepal after what's widely being seen as one of the most consequential elections the country has held in years. This is the first national vote since the dramatic youth-led uprising last September, when hundreds of thousands of mostly young Nepalis poured onto the streets and demanded an end to corruption, better economic opportunities and a political system they say has failed them. Now, those protests turned deadly. At least 77 people were killed, and within just 48 hours, the Prime Minister was forced to resign, paving the way for this election. Now, nearly 19 million people were eligible to vote, including close to 1 million first-time voters. The young people are the largest voting bloc in Nepal, and many analysts say that their anger and frustration could reshape the country's political landscape. Now, one of the most closely watched figures in this election is Balendra Shah, better known as Balen. He's a former rapper who rose to prominence as the mayor of Kathmandu and has built a huge following amongst younger voters. Now, he's positioned himself as a challenger to Nepal's entrenched political establishment. But the old guard is still very much in the race. Former Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli, who was forced from power last year, is also contesting and still commands strong support amongst loyalists. As for the results, we're unlikely to get a full picture right away. Now, officials hope to announce winners for the directly elected seats within about a day, but votes from remote and mountainous areas could take longer to count.
Meghna Bali there. Well, Beijing has made a rare acknowledgement of economic headwinds at the year's biggest meeting of its parliament. The National People's Congress has heard China's economy faces a sluggish domestic market and threats from global instability and trade wars. China correspondent Alison Horn has more from Beijing.
It can be hard to know sometimes what China's leaders are thinking, but this is the one time of the year you get a bit more of an insight into China's goals and ambitions. Thousands of decision makers from across the country have come here to Beijing for the biggest political meeting of the year, and this year the economy has been the major focus. China's premier announcing a reduced GDP target of 4.5 to 5%, the lowest it's been in about 5 years. Now, this is a reflection of China's attempt to rebalance its economy that's been propped up for years by extraordinary export wealth. But inside the country, people here aren't spending. Its domestic economy is in major trouble. And so China is now promising to invest more in social services, health, and also trying to get people to have more babies in the hope they'll spend more, with an acknowledgement of external threats like global instability and US tariffs.
We are also soberly aware of the difficulties and challenges we face. The impact of changes in the external environment is deepening. Multilateralism and free trade have been severely affected.
Now, this event is meant to be the one time of the year that journalists like myself in China are able to talk to politicians and ask them questions. But the reality is often quite different.
Ni hao, what does the change GDP target mean? What does the change GDP target mean? What does the change GDP target mean?
But eventually I did manage to get some politicians to explain what the changed GDP target means.
We must pursue progress while maintaining stability. This is a perfectly normal situation as the current circumstances are indeed not optimistic. The GDP target is merely a planning figure. However, I'm confident that our overall economy will continue to grow.
Now, the outcomes of the meeting this year are getting extra attention, particularly from Western leaders who in recent months have flocked to Beijing to try to re-establish and rebuild relations with China in the face of global instability led by the United States.
Alison Horn with that report there. Well, let's head to North Queensland now, where residents are bracing for heavy winds and rain, with a tropical low expected to make landfall today. With more, we're joined by reporter Connor Byrne in Cairns. Now, Connor, we spoke yesterday about this impending weather cell coming your way. What is the latest on the ground?
Well, after we spoke yesterday, the tropical cyclone watch was cancelled because the system was unable to form a cyclone. It was just too disorganised, with all the rain to the north and then the wind to the south. Now, that system, tropical low 29U, it is still yet to cross the coast. It's probably just off behind me, off Cairns. Right now it's off Port Douglas, but it will pass Cairns today, and it'll thread the eye of the needle between Innisfail and Cardwell. But overnight, heavy rain was experienced in the Daintree rainforest. The local council, Douglas Shire Council, it put out an emergency warning for riverine flooding along the Daintree and Barrett's Creek, and the river flooded to about 14 metres, which is about 2 metres above the major flood level of 12 metres. And this was at night, and this damaged the Daintree ferry, which is the only connection by road. It's a car ferry which goes across the river for the Daintree village. So residents are temporarily stranded until the ferry can be assessed. It has been damaged. It has been found. It slipped its moorings and slipped downstream a little bit. But alongside it, there was a few other boats. One, a local wildlife cruise boat, which has been damaged, and they're assessing that this morning. Falls in the region were up around more than 300 millimetres, close to 400 millimetres in some isolated regions. That wasn't unexpected. That's exactly what the Weather Bureau said was going to happen. But the amount of rain in the region has prompted health services to come out and ask residents to be very careful around floodwaters. We're very concerned in this region about a disease called melioidosis, which forms in the soil, and it can be fatal. So people are being asked to keep wounds clean, stay out of floodwaters, wear shoes. But not only that, this is the region which experienced Cyclone Jasper just over 2 years ago, just before Christmas 2023. They were cut off because of landslides. They didn't have water, they didn't have power, and they're still concerned, and we're still rebuilding after that event just over 2 years ago, So we had mudslides in the water system, and that is a fear again, that the authorities are warning us to conserve water. Gather water if we can in containers, and be careful with the amount of water we use, because it may not be able to cope. The intakes may not be able to cope with the amount of water that's coming through, and also with the any debris in the system. But there is still a severe weather warning for most of far north Queensland. There are flood watches active for most of the catchments around the Cape York Peninsula, around the Tablelands and the North Tropical Coast. So there have been no injuries or reports of inundated housing at this point. Fingers crossed it remains that way. The system, tropical low 29U, it has been coming very, very slowly. It's going to head south. It will bring rain to Cairns later today. It's a lovely day in Cairns at the moment, but some of the tourism operators are still going. I heard the Coranda train going this morning. I haven't seen any reef boats heading out, but they have been given the all clear if they want to go by the harbour master. Just keep an eye on the weather, pay attention to authorities. But the weather will kick in later on today. It's quite blustery here this morning with an offshore breeze heading off of Cairns. And the low off Port Douglas predicted to head towards Innisfail. That will bring rain as far south as possibly Mackay or Rockhampton, all the way down the north coast of Queensland in the coming days or coming hours. So it's going to be a wet weekend for North Queensland. That flood emergency warning still in effect for the Daintree. Severe weather warning still in effect for far north Queensland at the moment.
Connor Byrne, thank you. Well, let's get more weather now with Lillian Rangiah. Lillian, we just heard from Connor Byrne there. He's in Cairns. What more can you tell us about this system?
Good morning, Kath. Yeah, well, we're now very unlikely to get a cyclone, as Connor said, but there are still some torrential falls, particularly to the north of that system. We do also have another low over the NT as well, though. You can see it there on the map. We've got flooding in both the NT and Queensland already, and more rain to come today. So lots to keep an eye on. With that comes storms, not just in the north, but also into New South Wales as well. So lots to keep an eye on for you today, Kath.
Absolutely. Can you take us around the states now, Lillian?
Sure thing. So in Queensland, we've seen some torrential falls in the north already, up to 400 millimetres since 9 a.m. yesterday in some spots. Rain's continuing and spreading into central Queensland after that system crosses the coast today. Lots and lots of rain about in Queensland, particularly around the east coast. Brisbane, a shower or two and a top of 30 degrees. Heading into New South Wales, we could see some showers and thunderstorms developing in the east and stretching inland. Sydney looks to be dry though, headed to a top of 29. Dry in Canberra too, 30 the max. And in Victoria, the chance of some showers in the southwest and far east. Clear elsewhere, Melbourne reaching 25 degrees. Down in Tasmania, possibly some showers in the south and west. Hobart staying dry though, headed to 23 degrees. Across in South Australia, some possible rain in the far northeast and far southeast. Adelaide is mostly sunny, looking at 27 degrees. In WA, we're getting hot inland and through parts of the south. Perth is sunny though, reaching 36 degrees, and further north, storms in the Kimberley and throughout the top end north of Elliot. Darwin, rain headed to 29 degrees.
Thanks, Lillian. This is ABC News. I'm Kathryn Robinson. These are the top stories we are following this morning. The US President Donald Trump says he wants to have a say in who should lead Iran following the assassination of the supreme leader on the weekend. The conflict has now spread to more than a dozen nations after Azerbaijan accused Iran of 2 drone strikes. Meanwhile, the Israeli military has issued evacuation orders, warnings rather, for the southern parts of Lebanon's capital Beirut as it continues to target Hezbollah infrastructure. Islamist group Hizbut Tahrir has become the first organisation to be banned under the federal government's new hate speech laws. In effect, from today, the move will make it an offence to be a member of, recruit for, or provide support to the group. US Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem has been fired following criticism of her handling of immigration enforcement operations. The Secretary accused 2 civilians shot dead by federal agents in Minnesota of engaging in acts of domestic terrorism. Oklahoma Senator Markwayne Mullin has been named as her replacement. And the Matildas have qualified for the knockout stages of the Asian Cup with a 4-0 win over Iran on the Gold Coast. The Australians' second win of the group stage ensures a quarter-final berth, but they'll have to defeat South Korea on Sunday to top their group. Well, the war in Iran is spreading beyond the Gulf as Australia deploys 6 crisis response teams, and reports emerge that 2 Australian soldiers were involved in the torpedoing of an Iranian warship, which is yet to be confirmed by the government. As we know, Europe is also being dragged into the crisis, particularly after an Iranian drone struck a UK base in Cyprus. And now a new front in Azerbaijan is opening up after a drone attack on the airport and a village. So just how far could the conflict spread, and could it reach here? Dr. Malcolm Davis is a senior analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, and he joins us now from Canberra. Malcolm, thank you very much for your time. With respect to it reaching here, it's more about Australia's going over there. We know that crisis teams have been deployed for repatriation. There are reports of those 2 Australian soldiers that were involved in the torpedoing of the warship off Sri Lanka, yet to be confirmed by the government. Where could Australia's involvement extend to?
Look, I think the involvement at the moment is perfectly legitimate. So the government has sent those crisis teams. They've sent, I think, 2 Royal Australian Air Force aircraft to help evacuate Australian civilians from areas of risk. And the 2 Australian sailors on board the US Navy submarine have been there for months doing training, and that's perfectly legitimate too. So there's no issues here in terms of current involvement. In terms of future involvement, I think that it's very unlikely that Australia will get involved militarily at this point in time. At the most, what we would do is backfill US forces in the Indo-Pacific to free them up so that they could then deploy to the Middle East and support the operations against Iran. We do have the potential to send possibly a ship into the Arabian Sea to help ensure sea lanes of communication, trade routes are defended, but that's as far as it would go in terms of a combat role.
When you look to Europe, you look at the US, they tend to lean on Europe for the geography because they have key logistics hubs, they have bases, etc. Just how likely is it the US is going to lean on Europe more for support?
I think that's likely. You've already got US Air Force bombers operating out of RAF Fairford in the UK and also Diego Garcia, because they're two bases that are very important to ensure those bombers can do their job in terms of long-range operations. I think there are other bases or European facilities that could support US operations in the CENTCOM region. So it's quite possible that as Europe begins to realize that Iran is threatening everyone, the Europeans may, in fact, lend their support to the Americans. And there certainly seems to be early indications of that right now, with President Macron deploying an aircraft carrier into the Eastern Mediterranean, the German Chancellor Merz talking about potentially supporting the US and so forth. So I think Europe is probably aware that the Iranian threat does need to be dealt with in an effective way. And so it's best if we all work together to ensure that Iran cannot acquire nuclear weapons and cannot threaten other states in the region.
The Guardian is reporting that the UK Defence Secretary failed to rule out Britain joining the offensive action in Iran when speaking at a media conference. What do you expect there?
Well, look, I think that it would be foolish to rule anything out. You've noticed that when the war began, the Americans were saying there would be no possibility of boots on the ground. Well, now boots on the ground is an open issue. And I think that for the Europeans, it's equally sensible to keep their options open as much as possible. This war is going to continue on for many weeks, if not longer. There's already some suggestions amongst OSINT community that potentially the war could go through to September. So I think that the Europeans are quite justified in keeping their options opened and keeping the opportunity, if necessary, to step in and support the United States to make sure that at the end of the day, Iran is no longer a threat to the region.
How important is it to President Trump to maintain good relations with the UK? That relationship between President Trump and Sir Keir Starmer seems to be strained at the moment.
Yeah, look, I think the transatlantic relationship is on fragile ground, particularly after Greenland, which was very badly handled by the Trump administration. And I think that, it's important for the Trump administration to do its bit to try and repair the relationship, and that includes with the United Kingdom. There needs to be discussion between Trump and Starmer to iron out any differences. Trump, has a way of saying things that I think sometimes are not helpful. So I think that there needs to be a calm discussion, ideally some sort of face-to-face meeting to smooth troubled waters. And I think it's vital because the bigger strategic picture here is not necessarily Iran or Greenland, it's Russian threat to Europe's eastern frontier, particularly if Russia were to emerge out of Ukraine in a victorious state and able to then to regroup its forces and threaten NATO. So Europe and the United States need to work together to deter Russia and ensure that NATO remains the key defence organisation that it is.
You mentioned Ukraine-Russia there. We know that another line out in this conflict overnight is that the US has requested Ukraine for help with respect to drones. Are they in a position to do so?
I think they are, and they are the experts because they've been facing daily drone attacks since the war in Ukraine began in 2022. They have ample operational wartime experience in defending against drone threats. They're developing the technologies to do so. And I think that the Americans need to sit down and listen to the Ukrainians and take on board their expertise and their skills if the Americans want to have a better capability to take down the drone threat of Iran. At the moment, what we're seeing in Iran is that the Americans are using $1 million missiles to shoot down $20,000 drones. And that is unacceptable. It's not going to be sustainable. So I think what the Ukrainians can bring to the table is new and innovative approaches to deal with the Iranian drone threat that is much more cost effective and sustainable than what we're currently doing with, $1 million Patriot missiles that are being fired off to shoot down $20,000 drones.
Dr. Malcolm Davis, Senior Analyst at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Israel's medical system has been placed on high alert amid retaliatory strikes from Iran and more attacks by Hezbollah at the border with Lebanon. It means some advanced emergency hospital facilities are being brought into action. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran reports.
During times of war, essential services do need to be maintained, particularly the healthcare system. We're here at this hospital just north of Tel Aviv and we're about to go inside and then underground. This is the subterranean part of the Mayo Medical Centre, with patients moved down here as soon as the first emergency warnings were issued by Israeli authorities on Saturday morning.
We have the ability to treat actually all medical cases over there, whether it's ICU patients or ventilated patients or regularly internal medicine patients. We are now here in the neonatal unit, and we also have a functional, in full capacity operating rooms.
In around 8 hours, almost all of the vulnerable patients had been shifted from their wards above ground. Among them, premature babies. Staff are hoping to give a fighting chance to survive. While we were inside, a reminder of why we were there. We've just got an alert coming through there. I mean, that really goes to the point, doesn't it, that we're currently in a facility like this. Everyone who is down here is hearing that alert, but they're not actually having to rush off to a secure place.
That is absolutely correct. What we're seeing now is nice to know, but I don't need to do anything because I'm in a safe place, my loved ones are in a safe place, and I can carry on doing what I'm doing.
Above ground, there are also fortified areas designed to withstand attacks, including delivery rooms for pregnant mothers. Because you can't tell the baby to wait.
We can't tell them to wait. They just decide when they come, and they come.
This facility has been operational since 2024, but planning began well before then.
Basically started back in COVID when we started to understand, just like in the rest of the world, that we have to have a place that is safe for whatever happens.
Clearly, this is a very advanced facility. It's not necessarily something you'd see replicated right across this region. But the staff here are hoping, as much as they are prepared for the worst, that they don't really have to put this to too much use and that this conflict comes to an end very soon.
Matthew Doran there. Well, Formula One practice starts today and Kathryn Murphy is at Albert Park to bring us all the action. Kathryn, you just can't stay away from the track. I saw you yesterday trying to take Glenday down on Oscar Piastri's childhood track. You're back again today.
Thank you for even talking to me after you saw just how poorly I performed on the go-kart track. I just want to re-emphasise again that Glenday was given a more powerful go-kart. I was given a toy go-kart. And I mean, it's good to let him win the odd time. It was his birthday this week.
Correct.
But the real pros are getting on the track today, Kath, and it's going to be massive. So Formula One practice starts later today, but it's been a really chaotic build-up to this race. Of course, there are way bigger things going on in the world than a Formula One Grand Prix race. It is the first race of the season, but of course travel has really been impacted. A lot of Formula One personnel going the other way around the world to get here. I've talked to people who've flown through places like Tanzania and maybe spent 40 hours commuting instead of their usual journey. Now, the Australian Grand Prix Corporation were really keen to play down any impact. They said everyone that needs to be here to get the cars and the drivers on the track are at Albert Park. So understandably, they're playing it down because back in 2020, I don't want to bring this up, but the Australian Grand Prix was cancelled. That was at the start of COVID. Let's not revisit that period, but we do know it's possible. And the cancellations are unfortunately no longer unprecedented. Now, we talked to the CEO of the Grand Prix earlier, Travis Auld. He says everyone's here, we're all good. But just for your information and that of our audience, there are some key personnel missing. For example, George Russell of Mercedes. His physio is stuck in Bahrain. Instead, he's having to use an Australian physio, Kim Keedle, an amazing physio, former physio to Oscar Piastri, one of the best, but he's been drafted in late to work with George Russell. So there will be drivers who are working with new people. Their routines will be interrupted. These are high-performance athletes. They're not complaining. Well aware of how lucky we are just to be here and for this race to be going ahead. But stay tuned for that, Kath. A lot of unknowns and some personnel missing. But more broadly, everyone is ready to go.
OK, so a chaotic build-up but ready to go. We know that practice starts soon. What can we expect?
Let me tell you what we can expect. Now, this is our Kath Squared segment, so I decided to get dressed up. I'm looking a little bit tired after the week, and I've come up with the perfect solution. Have a look at this. Do I look a lot better, Kath? I feel like this one really suits me. This, of course, is Oscar Piastri, and I'm telling you right now, Oscar is ready to go, and his grandstand is opening. The Piastri grandstand, it's just over my left shoulder. It's opening today, celebrating his amazing achievements last year. He, of course, came so close to winning the title. Of course, it all came down to the final race. He is back at home for race one of the 2026 season, and it is an Oscar Piastri takeover here at Albert Park. The number of people coming through in McLaren colours, in papaya, supporting Oscar is incredible. It's going to be vocal, it's going to be loud. Everyone is behind him. Of course, Lando Norris, his teammate, winning the championship last year. Everyone wants Oscar to get the job done, and there are record crowds already. 84,000 people on the track. We're all cheering for Oscar. There's some big headlines too, though. Kath, so many unknowns heading into this Grand Prix. New cars, new regulations. We're hearing that if Aston Martin make it to the track, if they make it to the starting grid, they most likely won't complete the race. Their engine is not ready for race one. Can you believe that? Now, we asked the CEO of the Grand Prix about that. He says he knows as much as we do. We're just going to have to wait and see. All I know is that I am supporting this man, and I'm going to keep this mask on. Way more effective than a face mask the night before. Just
it looks good on you, Kathryn. I challenge you to get an autograph on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Kathryn, Oscar Piastri there. Well, as the cost of living crisis stretches budgets across the country, people in remote Indigenous communities say families are regularly going hungry. Despite a federal government subsidy scheme helping reduce some grocery costs, Northern Territory locals say more help is needed.
$10.80 for corned beef, $9.80 for hot dogs, $17 for a canned pie.
The prices are too high, and we can't afford to pay all that.
Many of Warrawee 500 locals think twice before they go shopping. The only community-owned shop uses its profits to subsidise fruit, vegetables and meat, but it's not enough.
We don't want the baby to go hungry, it's the little one.
Australia's competition watchdog found grocery prices soared 24% in the last 5 years. In remote areas, prices were already double those in the cities.
Because of the freight, it costs a fortune to bring the groceries here.
A federal government scheme which subsidises the cost of 60 essential groceries to match city prices has rolled out in 100 remote Indigenous communities. In Warrawee, it's dropped canned stew to $4, shampoo to $2, and taken canned veg down to a few dollars.
So it's really bringing down the prices of the base products, you know, things like your flour, meat.
People here in Goulburn Island say the federal government's subsidies on some groceries are helping, but many families are still struggling to afford enough food.
You know, there's a lot of young children out here that don't get to eat every day because of the affordability costs.
In a region where a majority are reliant on federal government welfare benefits, local leaders want payments increased.
The government have to start looking at people on Centrelink to increase their wages because it's not fair, you know.
We want to feed our children to go to school healthy, strong, every day.
It's something many find difficult to do now. Jane Barton, ABC News, Warrawee.
Returning now to the situation in the Middle East, and the Strait of Hormuz is not just a key trading route for oil and gas, it also facilitates up to a third of the world's trade in raw materials for fertiliser. The effective closure of the strait is affecting the transport of nitrogen and ammonia, which could have a huge impact on household staples such as bread, pasta and potatoes. For more, we're joined by Monash University economist Professor Robert Brooks. Good morning to you, Robert. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Kath. Lovely to speak to you.
So nitrogen and ammonia, they're key ingredients for synthetic fertiliser. Just how much is being held up in the Strait of Hormuz? How much could this affect the global production of fertiliser?
So it's got a really potentially very significant effect. I mean, the Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz plays about a third of the world trade, as you mentioned, in urea, and any disruption to that is really quite significant. You know, we've already seen a spike in the prices of urea as a result of the conflict, even from other regions that are producers. So there certainly is some price pressure there that's related to the significant supply concerns, because there's a lot of the world's urea production that happens in the Gulf and the Middle East region.
So we're seeing a spike in the price of urea right now. Are we seeing any direct impact to our farmers here yet? And if not now, do you expect that to come?
So the big question on that really is, how long is this going to last? So if we have a short disruption, you get a spike in prices, and if you have to absorb that spike in prices, that clearly affects the profits and the margin. And there's elements of that happened when we had the conflict in the middle of last year, where urea supplies got interrupted and prices went up. The big challenge on this is if it goes on for a period of time and it starts getting into when, decisions have to be made about, nitrogen-based fertilisers and their importance in the agricultural growing cycle, that we then run the risk that you've got farmers making, production decisions where they're getting squeezed in terms of their profits, but they're also have to making decisions about fertiliser usage, and that in a period of time at the end of those growing cycles has the risk of transferring through into yields and to production that affects supply issues. So unlike the oil and gas elements of this, where, we see a really immediate effect, the risk on these fertiliser supply chains is it can take an agricultural growing cycle for them to become more visible to everyone. So it is a really big and important risk to be thinking about at the minute.
So what sort of foods or crops are most likely to be impacted if this is protracted?
So anything that's got anything where nitrogen-based fertilisers play a major role, has a significant effect. So nitrogen-based fertilisers across the world, are strongly embedded in the supply chain of production of wheat and of canola oils and those sort of activities. And wheat and canola oils are, important commodities that we buy every day, but they're also really important in terms of other agricultural supply chains. So if you get these effects, you pretty much see them pervasively across the board in different commodities. Now, you don't see them straight away, but you certainly will. There certainly is a risk that we see them if we get a period of disruption that goes longer. We know from what happened last year when the conflict went for a period of 12 days that that was able to be absorbed. A conflict that goes for longer is more risky, and there's also more risk that it's not just the shipping dimension of the Strait of Hormuz, it's actually the production infrastructure in the Gulf states that gets damaged and disrupted as part of the conflict. And there's not a lot of additional spare capacity to turn on quickly.
When you mentioned yields there and cycles, we know that Europe is at its planting season right now. Presume they've got enough for this season, enough fertiliser for this season, but then what about for next?
So the Europe one is big. So one of the countries that plays a major role into sort of the supply of urea into Europe is Egypt. Now, Egypt, gas is a big part of production of urea. In the conflict last year, supplies out of Egypt got significantly disrupted because Israeli gas supplies into Egypt got disrupted because it's Israeli gas that actually plays a really big role in that. Urea prices have spiked. So at the moment, profit margins for agricultural producers are going to be hit and there's going to be some price pressure. To date, in terms of the conflict, we haven't seen as large a supply disruption in terms of Egypt yet. The other risk on all of this, Kath, is in terms of shipping and this question around insurance for shipping and shipping needing to be rerouted, which is also a particular risk if the conflict expands and starts affecting into the Red Sea and the Suez in a significant way, which it has not as yet. So I think in terms of your question, that risk is not immediately there, but an expansion of it and a longer duration then starts to have the risk of a bigger effect.
Just very briefly, in the last 30 seconds or so that we've got left, Robert, you mentioned the 12-day war back in June of last year. We saw a spike, but that was absorbed. But if we can take our minds back to the pandemic in 2022, huge supply chain problems from around the world, could it get that bad?
So we did have out of the pandemic, that was one of the issues that did happen. We did get a significant disruption of gas supplies. The immediate effect of that was clearly in energy prices, but it was also in fertiliser prices, and it got embedded into inflationary pressure as a supply shock. The longer any of this goes for, the more risk there is for that, and the harder it makes the management of inflation as a macroeconomic policy issue.
Might have to be touching base with you again sometime, but for now, Professor Robert Brooks from Monash University, thank you.
Thanks, Kath.
Time to check the weather now with Lillian Rangiah.
Good morning. It's very unlikely that we'll get a cyclone in North Queensland, but we'll still see some torrential falls, particularly just north of the system's centre. We've also got another low bringing lots of rain over the NT as well. And there's flooding in both the NT and Queensland already, with more rain to come today. And with that comes storms, not just in the north, but also in the south, in New South Wales. Looking around the states, though, Queensland will see those heavy falls continuing up the north, with most of the east coast getting some rain today. Now, that's expected to spread to central Queensland after the system crosses the coast. Brisbane, a shower or two, reaching a top of 30. New South Wales, we could see some showers and thunderstorms developing in the east, stretching inland. Sydney looks dry, though, headed to 29. Dry in Canberra too, 30 the maximum there. Victoria, the chance of some showers in the south and west. And southwest and far east, rather, clear elsewhere. Melbourne reaching a top of 25 degrees. Tassie could see some showers in the south and west. Hobart staying dry, though, headed to 23. In most of South Australia, some high pressure means it'll be clear in most of the state. Adelaide's mostly sunny, looking at 27. In WA, getting hot inland and parts of the south. Perth's a sunny 36 degrees today. Heading further north, the storms are continuing throughout the Kimberley and the top end in particular, north of Elliot. Darwin, rain headed to a top of 29.
Lillian, thank you. And there's more on the ABC News app and, of course, on ABC iView. I'm Kathryn Robinson. Do stay with us next hour on the ABC News channel. There have been more repatriation flights that have touched down in Sydney. We'll hear from our reporter at Sydney Airport. There were, of course, flights that touched down overnight in Melbourne. So there have been jubilant scenes there as people welcome home their loved ones who have been stranded in the Middle East since the war began. Do stay with us. I'll have all those stories plus plenty more on the ABC News channel.